And we are live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the stream. I hope you're all doing well. I'm very happy to have you back here for another interview with a member of the European Parliament. But tonight we're doing things a bit different because we will not focus on the specific career of one MEP, the specific priority of one MEP. We will instead focus on one topic, and the topic is artificial intelligence. So unless you've been living on a rock, you probably know that artificial intelligence is no longer a technology that exists only in movies, in science fiction and all that. It's very much a reality today, and it will get only more and more present in our society as time passes. So you can find already today, you can find AI in industrial production, educational systems, police surveillance. You can even find it in military drones. So it's getting everywhere. And as far as the European Union is concerned, the EU always prides itself at being at the vanguard of digital regulation in the world. So, as you know, we did GDPR to protect personal data. We just finished the DSA and the DMA to regulate big online services. So yeah, now the EU wants to define the rules for AI and, let's say, find a European way to use AI. So it's a slightly important debate, and I thought it would be interesting to dedicate a stream to it. And to help us understand that tonight, we will discuss with MEP Dragos Tudorache from Renew Europe Group, so on the center of European politics. Why Mr. Tudorache is with us tonight? Because he happens to be the co-rapporteur on the AI Act, which is the new EU law to regulate AI, and before that he was in charge of the special EU committee dealing with AI. So that means that in the parliament right now, he's one of the two persons leading the negotiations on this file. So he knows a bit about AI, he's heard a bit about it. Negotiations are still ongoing, and so nothing is set in stone, it takes time, it's complicated, but he will be able to explain us what is this European approach to AI, what are the main political debates around it, and maybe some of his ideas on where this regulation should go. But before we start, as usual, I remind the house rules for anyone who would be new with us tonight. So our guest will be with us for about an hour. After that, he will go and enjoy his evening in Strasbourg, while you will be stuck with me for maybe half an hour to debrief the interview with you, discuss, answer additional questions, that sort of thing. As usual, I have prepared my questions. You can suggest your own questions in the chat. Feel free to react and participate, but as always, do it without spamming and while staying civil. And bear in mind that tonight we're only talking about AI, so I will take only questions related to AI, nothing else. We will, even if it's a policy interview, let's say, we'll try to not go into too complicated jargon and things. So yeah, we'll do our best. No guarantees there. We will see how it goes. But yeah, keep that in mind when they're discussing and asking your questions. So. On this note, I suggest that we start. Good evening, Dragos Tudorache. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us tonight, especially given that, like I said, you are right in the middle of negotiations on the AI Act, so a very topical thing. So you heard me a bit introduce you in the introduction. Is there anything that I missed that you would like to add about you before we dive into it?
Well, I think the topic is more important, as you rightly said yourself. The topic is more important than myself or my career. Maybe important to note that I'm not at all a specialist on digital issues. I'm in fact a lawyer. And I could even consider myself a bit of a digital idiot. I always turn to my kids to ask them how to use something in my phone that I don't know how to use. But for me, the topic was attractive because of its consequences on much broader issues than the technology itself. And I think it's important to understand that this, let's say, legislative endeavor that we have started here at the European Union level is not about the technology per se, it's about its use, about its broader implications on our societies, economies, lives, politics, democracy, whatever. So it's through these lenses that I have from the very beginning regarded this topic.
And so we'll be talking a lot about AI, artificial intelligence, but maybe let's define a bit the terms, because AI, sometimes you put everything and nothing behind those two letters. So could you a bit define a bit what at EU level we talk about when we're talking about AI? What is exactly the EU regulating when it talks about AI?
That's
easy, I know.
That's not that simple an answer, because that in fact is going to be one of probably most hot debates that we're going to have in the course of the negotiations of this text, which is what is AI? What is going to be captured in the definition that EU is going to adopt for AI? If we take let's say the European Commission suggestion for a definition, it is about those pieces of software, those algorithms that function in a certain autonomous way, and it also the Commission lists certain type of technologies that are linked to that, and which produce a result on the basis of data that is being fed into it. So in a way, you could think of data as the fuel and AI as the engine that uses that fuel to produce an outcome. And what, in fact, the Commission in its approach is trying to define, to provide as a scope for application for AI, is, in fact, as I was saying earlier, the uses, the actual practical applications of the AI, not the actual technology itself, not the algorithms themselves. They are not the ones that are going to be, let's say, regulated. It is how they are going to be used and the effects that they produce. So I think that if we understand that already, I think a lot of the conversations and the answers that I'm going to give to your questions later would also be easier.
Well, now, like you mentioned, the EU has proposed a regulation on the AI to regulate the use, not the technology again. But in all the speech, the Commission is in Parliament, everyone is talking, oh yes, what we want to do is foster a European way of dealing with AI, and so often they oppose it to the American way of dealing with AI and the Chinese way to deal with AI. So, what is the European way of AI?
I think the easiest, quickest way to define the European way is to say what the Commission says itself, which is human-centric. Human-centric, risk-based. What that means is that I repeat myself, we recognize that the technology itself is neutral. And like any other technology, you can't really put rules around it, but it's, in fact, what you want to regulate is how the technology is used. If you have a knife could be used both to hurt someone, but also to cut bread. So again, you can't regulate the knife, but you can regulate how you use a knife. It's the same thing here. So the European approach, in fact, is to say, listen, this technology can have implications on our rights, on our interests as humans. And because of those implications, because of those risks to human interests, we need to set rules in place. And this European way of doing it, of writing the regulations, is a human-centric way, i.e., we regulate the risks. And now we go into the approach that the Commission has taken, which is to say, listen, there is a pyramid of risk. Imagine a pyramid, and in that pyramid, they have certain floors from the tip to the bottom. And there you have, at the very tip of the pyramid, you have those type of applications that are so risky for human interests, for human rights, that we simply do not want to have in Europe, because we recognize that they are so detrimental to the values that we hold dear in the European Union that we cannot accept them at all. So that is the tip of the iceberg, very narrow, defined in one article as prohibited practices of AI. Then we have another floor, which is the high-risk applications of AI, which again, they are prone to risk. They are raising risks in terms of, again, how they apply and the kind of effects that they can have on human interests, on human rights, and therefore they have to go through certain rules about how they are being put on the market, certain compliance requirements, so that they fulfill certain safeguards that we will write in the legislation. You have another narrower floor with still risky, but with, let's say, a lesser degree of risk. And those type of applications will require increased transparency. And then you have the large base of the pyramid, which is basically AI that does not need to be regulated because it does not affect those human interests. And the large majority, and this is a very important point to make, the large majority of AI is going to remain unregulated because it's going to be that AI that is being used to optimize industrial processes in our factories or in our shops or in the provision of our services, is going to optimize the way, I don't know, we have public utilities from water to electricity to gas. Very, very important conversation these days. And therefore, because, and here I open a bracket, it's very important to understand that we also at the European Union level, speaking of the European method, we also want to foster and encourage innovation. We also want to encourage uptake of AI because we recognize that this is going to be at the core of our future. And therefore, it is important that a lot of it is left unregulated because there you want innovation to take place as quickly, as easily as possible, without burdens for brilliant young engineers that might have brilliant ideas. And that is, sorry to have taken a little bit longer, but that is basically what we in Europe believe is the right approach.
Yes.
Now the question is, will we be aligned with the other players out there, US, China, you mentioned, but again, if you want me to develop on that, it's a very interesting part of this conversation.
But actually, since we're on it, let's develop on the, let's say, the alternative ways around the world to deal with AI. How do they do things differently, let's say?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this conversation, and it's important to understand also why I was saying at the beginning that AI was very important. That's why I was interested in the file, because of its implications. And those implications actually go all the way to geopolitical, strategic implications. Why? Because it is important who actually writes the rules and standards on this technology that is going to be present again in everything we do. In every piece of human activity, you're going to have AI. You already have it in a large part of it, but in the next 5 to 10 years, this is going to be the core, the main driver of, again, economic processes, societal processes, democratic processes, and politics. So it becomes a geopolitical matter as to how is it that you produce these rules and how aligned you are at the global level with other important actors on the global stage when it comes to this digital revolution. And this is where I think that we as Europeans, I think it's important that we are the first ones to try to regulate. But I think this time around, compared to the way we did it in other pieces of legislation, we also have to be very mindful of what our partners are doing. So it is an important point that under the Trade and Technology Council that we have launched with the United States, this is an integral part of the conversation that we have with our strategic US partners. Why? Because, again, we understand values in the same way. We understand democracy in the same way. And therefore, we also have a shared interest that the way the rules of this technology look like is congruent with these values and the way, again, we understand democracy. And this, unfortunately, does come in contrast with a different vision of the role of technology in society, which others out there on the global scene have. And I'm not shy to say China or Russia or others for whom technology is enabler for them to control society, for the state to control society, to control individuals. And I think there are plenty of examples out there that I'm sure you are aware as well of how, for example, in China, AI technology is being used to basically control individuals for social scoring, for basically everything that almost a Chinese individual does. And that's not the model that we want to apply to this technology. So the conversation of how the rules look like, the conversation on how the standards for developing AI in the future look like, again, becomes a very geopolitical affair. And here we have an interest not only in discussing and aligning with our US partners, there are others, again, who share our democratic values, Canada, Japan, South Korea, India, Australia, so on and so forth. And that's why it becomes very important as we progress with this legislation, as we're going to finish this legislation, as we will start after we finish to produce standards, it is important that we stay constantly engaged in what I call AI diplomacy. Basically reaching out constantly to other like-minded partners, the ones that I mentioned, to make sure that, again, we continue to be aligned in our vision of how we develop AI.
And since you mentioned like the importance of being aligned with like-minded countries, so right now you are in the process of negotiating inside the parliament the AI Act. So is that a conversation that you are having right now with US partners? So you have discussions with congressmen across the Atlantic or representative of the US government to try to make sure that the position of the parliament would stay aligned with in the US? Or is this a conversation that should happen before or after the parliament has taken the position?
To understand the level of engagement, I think I need to take several steps back, but I'll be short. First, we have to understand that before EU has produced this piece of legislation, this proposal, there was already common work that was done on, let's say, the more high-level definitions of AI, the principles of AI. And this work was done in multilateral fora like OECD, but not only, in other UN bodies where, again, we were not alone. We were there together with US, together with the other countries of the world, and there we developed together the fundamental principles of AI. And that was already an important piece of the work on which the Commission has based itself when they started to prepare this legislation. So that was already, let's say, a first level of alignment. Then, the moment that the Commission proposed the launch of the Trade and Technology Council, the TTC, with the US, and then there was the first meeting in Pittsburgh exactly a year ago, in September last year, AI was one of the key priorities under the TTC. Why? Again, because we had a shared interest to ensure convergence. Convergence not only on how we evolve writing the rules, but also on how we write standards, on how we develop common projects with the overall objective, I don't want to repeat what I said, with the overall objective of making sure that, the way we see AI and the values underpinning it becomes, let's say, the global norm, the global standard. And since the launch of the TTC, there was important work that was done at technical level, administration to administration, European Commission with the US administration in working together on common projects, on working together on common standards. At political level, this is where we come in. You mentioned that I chaired the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence in Parliament. One of the first things that I've done as chair of the Special Committee when it was set up almost 2 years ago was to reach out to the US partners. There is an AI caucus in the US Congress. I've reached out to the chairs of the AI caucus. We started a conversation that then developed into participations in events that I was organizing as chair of the special committee here. I was participating in events that they were organizing on their side. And that's when we realized also at the political level as rule makers on both sides that we actually, even if, let's say, we have a different sense of priority in terms of writing laws, because on the US side, they are not preparing legislation like we do. But in terms of understanding the fundamentals behind AI, understanding the overall objectives, the impact on society, the biases in AI, in all that, we were actually quite aligned. So on the basis of that, I've continued to invest in this conversation. Just 2 weeks ago, I spent a week in the US, in Washington and New York, speaking to congressmen and women, speaking to the administration, to the White House, to the NIST, which is the National Institute for Standards and Technology in the US, which is working on standards, talking to the think tanks and industry out there, because I really want to push this idea of convergence. And again, even if normatively, let's say, we would be on different levels, because US Congress works in a certain way. Now with elections, it's kind of blocked. But even if, again, we're not going to arrive at the finish line at the same time with legislation, if we do all this other work behind, both in terms of diplomacy and diplomatic outreach, but also in terms of working together on standards, I think that we will reach objectives. And then beyond that, there is also work that is taking place in other fora. I'll give you an example. Japan is going to hold the presidency of G7 next year. They want to dedicate their presidency to digital, again, recognizing how vitally important the digital revolution is for mankind, basically. And AI is going to be an integral part of G7 as well. So in all of these multilateral fora, where we sit together with like-minded countries and partners, AI will always be, from now on the agenda, again, striving for this convergence, striving for this shared vision that we will need to set for the evolution of AI technology.
Final question, let's say outside of Europe before we get back to the EU, but still linked to the US, because you said the US is not yet at the stage of regulating, but I saw this morning that Joe Biden announced an AI Bill of Rights to set the general principle. Did you have a chance to have a look at it already? What are your impressions?
Already since last year, when I first visited Washington as chair of the special committee, and in fact, we went there with a delegation of the special committee, and we met with White House, Congress, everybody. At the White House, they told us that they will start working on this Bill of Rights, on this AI Bill of Rights, which is meant, again, to be the first building block before the Congress will be deciding to move a bill. And that, by the way, and this is fresh impressions that I bring from Washington from 2 weeks ago. I think even in let's say I'm more optimistic now than I was last year when I was in Washington, that after elections in the US, there might be initiatives in Congress that will also try to put forward a bipartisan proposal, a bipartisan bill on AI. But until that happens, basically the approach of the administration, the approach of the White House was to start with this AI Bill of Rights, which is a way of course, it doesn't have the power of law, so it's not legislation, but it's basically a political statement. It's a political statement of intent, of overall principles, trying to codify somehow what are those important values that I mentioned earlier, those important effects of artificial intelligence that we want to protect in societies, and that US recognizes that they want to also protect in their society. So that's how we have to understand this Bill of Rights. And I am convinced, based on the conversations that I've had in the White House, that there's going to be quite a lot of alignment in terms of the language, the narrative that this Bill of Rights is going to have, and what we have had ourselves at the European Union level in terms of the high-level principles on AI, which were worked in the EU before the proposal on the AI Act was done, and also in a lot of the provisions that are contained right now in the proposal that we are working on.
So let's get back to the EU and the AI Act, for which you are co-rapporteur. So you mentioned at the top of the pyramid, you have a number of AI uses that are deemed so dangerous that they are altogether banned. You would not be able to use AI for these purposes. So could you give us a couple of examples of what kind of AI uses would be completely banned in the EU?
So the one that you're probably going to hear mostly about, or the one on which you probably might have already read news, is biometric recognition in public spaces in real time. So there is something that, again, from the outset, from the proposal of the Commission, it was considered to be so intrusive in our privacy. And we all know that privacy is something that we hold very dear in our union, and I don't think we should be shy about that. I think we should be proud that we value our privacy so much. And again, because such technology used in real time in public spaces is considered to be so intrusive into our privacy that it is put up there in the categories of prohibited practice. So we simply do not want to have this kind of technology deployed in our public spaces. There's one example. Second example, social scoring. I was mentioning earlier that China is well known for basically using artificial intelligence and social scoring, basically using an amalgamated set of personal data and behavior and characteristics that is picked up on from pretty much every other behavior that you have on other platforms, and they aggregate what the state believes you are worth and how risky you are for the establishment. That's what the Chinese do. And again, that's something that we in Europe do not want to do, because again, that would go so much against what we believe of our rights and our values and our role in society as individuals, that we simply do not want to have such technology used at all in the European Union. The same thing for subliminal manipulation. Subliminal manipulation, which is basically a way of, without us being manipulated in ways that go past our perception, with our senses. And this is something on which we are actually already working, because I think that this particular definition is going to suffer some changes, some amendments, to be very careful on how we define manipulation, also to maybe include some other forms of manipulation online, because we see how much that has affected the very fabric of our societies. We see how much online manipulation has underpinned detrimental processes in our societies, how it turned our society against against each other, so much that, again, we need to be very careful on how we allow this technology to be deployed. So these are some examples of what is in the proposal of the Commission. Now, in the course of the negotiations, there are proposals coming from political groups on additional use cases, the additional applications of AI that could be prohibited. I'll give you another example: predictive policing. Predictive policing is basically algorithms that, again, using amalgamated data and statistics and personal data, they would be predetermining whether you are prone to commit a crime or not. Remember the Minority Report movie, for those of you that might have seen, Tom Cruise? Well, do we want that kind of a technology in our societies? A lot of us, myself included, believe that we should not have that kind of technology being deployed. It was used, and it is already used in several parts of the world. Actually, even in the US, many police departments in many big cities in the US have used such algorithms, and in the meantime, many of them have started abandoning them. Why? Because they realized how prone to bias and discrimination these algorithms were. Because what happens with AI is that it is as good, in many respects, it is as good as the data that you feed into it. So if you feed data that is already biased, that is already discriminatory, and unfortunately, a lot of the databases that exist out there, they are biased. They are containing, in a way, the biases that are taken over from our physical world, from our physical society. And if you if you simply feed blindly the data into an algorithm, what that algorithm will do will actually simply carry on those biases into the way it works, and often it would even accelerate, amplify those biases in the results that it produces. And do we want to have such tools used by our law enforcement authorities? No, we don't. At least, again, a part of us in Parliament believes so. And that's why it is being proposed as an additional practice that we would prohibit through this text. So these are some examples of what would be sitting at the top of the pyramid.
And so now you're working on the regulation itself. You're negotiating with your colleagues from different political groups, from different committees, because you're from the Libe committee, the Civil Liberties Committee, but you have colleagues from the Culture Committee, from the Single Market Committee, etc. So you have lots of people involved. But you yourself, what were your main proposals to improve the proposal of the Commission, the AI Act?
So I've had, still have, and will continue to have until the rest of these negotiations several big priorities. And that comes also from my fabric as a politician. I'm a liberal politician, and therefore, on one hand, I'm absolutely convinced of the need to ensure these rules and these safeguards to protect our human interests and human rights. That is why I'm also representing the Civil Liberties Committee in this negotiation. But at the same time, as a liberal politician, I also want to ensure that we are not putting unnecessary barriers to this technology. Because again, what we have to understand is that this is going to be the driver of the economy of the future. AI will be powering up everything that our economies will produce, all of our services in the future. So we also have an interest, apart from protecting our rights, we also have an interest to make sure that the European Union becomes a champion in using AI, in producing AI, in developing, in researching, in basically boosting how AI can help our economic growth. And therefore, one of my interests in this negotiation is to ensure a balance between what I said earlier, the human-centric approach and the innovation-centric approach. So a lot of the amendments that I have done are meant to balance these two interests, these two objectives, in a way that we achieve both the protection, but also we encourage innovation. Now, I'll give some examples. I have revamped almost entirely the provisions on sandboxes. Sandboxes, for those of you that are not familiar, imagine a sandbox. Imagine a place where if you want to develop an algorithm, but you're not sure whether, is my algorithm high risk, or maybe it's prohibited, or is it falling in this category, in that category, and therefore I don't know what kind of compliance requirements I'll have to go through. Do I need to hire a lawyer to tell me whether I'm compliant with the law or not? And maybe I'm just, again, a startup, and I can't afford to have an army of compliance officers to tell me whether I'm doing the right thing or not. So a sandbox is a place where you can go and you can safely test. You can safely test also interacting with the regulator. So the regulators will be obliged under the law, if I get my way, but I think I will, to basically set these sandboxes up in a way that afterwards developers, companies, big or small, can interact with the regulators in a safe environment, test their application, make sure that they are compliant before they put their application on the market.
So in the end, it's a form of crash test. It's where people who develop AI, they do their crash test their AI and say, okay, does it work? Does it work in a way that is compliant, or do I need to work again on that? If I summarize,
you can call it a crash test. Ideally, it would be that you don't crash too much, but
hopefully.
It's a place for, well, how I like to call it is a place for trial and error. So it's a place where it is okay to make mistakes. It is okay to maybe not get everything right from the beginning. And it's a place where, again, we can achieve compliance by also interacting with the regulator, which is very important. We have to break down the barrier between our economic sector and our regulators. We tend to be in Europe sometimes too much top-down, too much focused on the role of the state. Here we have to start creating a common language between public authorities, between the state and the economic sector. We have to start to teach our regulators to actually talk, and it's okay to talk, it's okay to interact with your companies, because these companies are the ones that are basically your engine. This is what produces workplaces, this is what powers up your economy, this is what produces wealth in our societies. So again, we have to rethink fundamentally the role of the interaction between the state and companies. And for me, this is an important objective, and this is what I'm going to try to do with a lot of my amendments. A second objective that I have, and it's linked to that, is governance. I think the way, in a way, it is not only valid for this text, I think it's valid for a lot of EU legislation. More important than how you write the rules is how you apply the rules and how you enforce the rules. So for me, how you set up the governance, i.e. The way you will be implementing and enforcing the AI Act, the AI rules, is very important. If we are to follow the logic that was followed, for example, with the GDPR, with the data protection regulation, which is, by the way, what the Commission also proposed for this text, which is to leave all of the application, all of the enforcement at the level of our governments, at the level of the member states. For me, that is not a solution, because that means that you'll have 27 different markets, 27 different understandings of this law, 27 different applications of the law. And we see it with the GDPR. You have a very haphazard implementation of the same rules, of the same norms. And that means basically fragmenting your market. We're supposed to be a single digital market. We're supposed to give companies the chance, the opportunity to use the whole potential of the EU market, because that's the only way they can be competitive with the other big global actors out there, China and the US. How can you do that if every time you want to launch a product in your neighbor member state or another member state, you have to first make sure if the way your regulator in your country understood the rules is the same way in which the other regulator understands the rules, not to mention language barriers and others. So the less barriers we put, the better, which is why, again, in my vision of the governance of this, there should be a more centralized governance, an office at the European Union level that can actually have a very common understanding of what the rules look like and how they need to be applied, and that can also play as a referee between the national regulators when needed, when fragmentation arrives. And it's also a place where stakeholders, and here it's not only the industry, the companies, but also civil rights organizations that also look after the rights of the users and the citizens, can come together and feed the reality on the ground to the ones that are making decisions. And I consider to be that key. It is linked to what I was saying earlier about us learning to be a bit more bottom up and not top down. in the way we enforce rules. So these are just some of my big priorities. I can talk for hours about them, but in the interest of time, I'll stop here.
Okay, and actually, so those are your ideas, but you're not alone in the room. You have other MEPs representing different committees, different political groups, etc., etc. So obviously, certain ideas might clash. So what are the main political differences when you are in the negotiations right now with your colleague that occupy your days, let's say, these days?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's important to know that this is going to be probably one of the most debated legislative act in this mandate. I think we hold the record for number of amendments during this mandate, 3,300 or 3,400 amendments for this text, which shows, again, how much attention and how important this text is. So, what are the political? I wouldn't call them dividing lines, but basically hot topics in the negotiations these days. I will start with what I was saying earlier when you asked me about the definition. I said it already. The definition is subject to quite an ideological debate between the left and the right. The left side of the House wants a broader definition, one that captures as much as possible of understandings and applications of AI. Since then, in their vision, the precision of the definitions and of the scope of application will come in the way you define the prohibited practices or the high-risk practices. So the left has this interest of having a very broad definition. The right side of the House has an interest in having a narrower definition, one which in their arguments is going to help the industry by not creating blanket rules, blanket definitions that risk of capturing too much and putting therefore too much burden unnecessarily on some applications of AI that otherwise are not producing any risk to human interest. So this is one example of a clash. As always, and because I'm not only the rapporteur, but I'm also a centrist, as you said, it would be in a way up to me to try to find a common ground between these two different visions. And I think the common ground could be found in also pitching the definition closer to similar definitions that have been developed in broader bodies at the global level. I was mentioning the importance of staying aligned with the other like-minded partners. There is a very good definition, OECD. That could be something that we could strive to achieve, and that could also be an interesting middle ground. Another big political debate is about general purpose AI. For those of you that understand a little bit of AI, general purpose AI or GPAI are those algorithms that are just a thinking machine that is not yet allocated to a purpose. And some of the most powerful machines of this kind are the ones that are produced by Google. For example, language processors. And there is one side of the House that says, listen, these general purpose AI should escape regulation. We should not be making them. We should not be making them part of this text under the scope of the regulation. Others say no, they should not be excluded, because in any way, until they are allocated to a particular purpose, they are not regulated because they don't produce any effects. So you don't need to exclusively carve them out of the definition, carve them out of the scope of the regulation, because in a way, if that algorithm is then allocated to a particular purpose, fed some data and given an objective, and that objective falls under one of my categories, then it should not escape regulation. So there again, we're going to have a debate. Same thing about open source AI, which is linked to the GPAI. And again, this is where we will need to find the middle ground. Another big battle is going to be on prohibited practices. I mentioned biometric recognition in public spaces. This is not going to be at all a simple debate, because again, you have between the right and the left, you have two different visions. One that wants an absolute ban, another one that wants a more nuanced, let's say, with exceptions in terms of who can and who cannot use, that law enforcement should be able in certain conditions to use this technology and deploy it in public spaces. So again, ideologically, quite a hot debate, which we will try which I will have to try to moderate and find a common ground for it. Then there's going to be a big debate also on the high risk applications, the one that are contained in Annex 3 of the regulation. Some want more, a longer list, some want a shorter list. Again, pretty much along the same ideological lines between the left and the right. And also there'll be a big debate on the kind of requirements, the kind of compliance assessment that will be done. There are political families that are seeing the need for a third-party assessment. So in other words, you don't assess yourself. You have to go to a certifying body that will say, listen, here's the stamp, your application is in that category or in that category, you're safe to go on the market or you're not. And then there are others, and myself included, I am one of those who believe that actually the initial commission proposal, which is to apply self-assessments, is serving that balance that I was mentioning earlier much better. So you have the compliance rules, you have the requirements, you know what they are, you have the standards, then you do a self-compliance. You explain how your algorithm works, you document it, you are transparent about how it works, and that is enough. And then, of course, the regulator has the power, the competencies to come and verify, and if it finds that you have not properly self-assessed, then of course there can be consequences, sanctions for that. But that, in my mind, and in the minds of those who support this idea of self-assessment, is a much more balanced way of ensuring that, again, you're not putting too much burden on innovation and creativity and development. So again, just few of the big political fault lines, let's say, on which we are going to have in the coming weeks and months and possibly year, the big debates in this file.
So the AI Act, it defines it was written in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. You're working on it in 2022, so you have a set list, a closed list of forbidden AI, of AI that are high risk, etc. But once it's set in stone, I mean, then AI will continue to evolve after the AI Act is finalized. So how flexible will it be? I mean, do we have the possibility to update the AI to add new high risk or remove uses that at some point were high risk, and then after a while say, oh no, actually it's not so high risk anymore, you remove it? Is the text flexible enough?
Very, very important question, very important point. When you try to set rules for, in fact, any kind of technology, but particularly for a technology like AI, which is constantly not evolving, leaping, the AI of yesterday is not the same as the AI of today. Basically, these algorithms are learning every day. They are becoming more and more powerful every day. And this is a trend that is going to increase exponentially. So indeed, the question is, how do you make sure that the rules that you will maybe adopt in 1 year's time, hopefully, in 1 year's time, and they are going to be enforced in 2 years' time, how will they still be adapted to the technology that already leaped a million times from now to then? The truth of the matter, and this is another philosophical debate that maybe you would think of doing once, I think, in fact, a lot of our tools of the trade, legislation, I think will need to be rethought, reconsidered for the future. Because future is going to put more and more challenges like this in front of us. And we, I think, soon are going to figure out that the legislative tools that we have at our disposal, the way we write rules, is no longer capable to cater again for these new realities. But anyway, I close philosophy here. What I want to say is that, again, with the little tools that we have at our disposal to ensure future-proof legislation and adaptable legislation, we are going to do the best we can. And the best we can in EU terms means that we will leave the parts of the text that need adaptation, we will leave them in annexes, or they would be covered by what in EU jargon, and I promise I will not use EU jargon, but I'll explain in 30 seconds, we will leave it to comitology. Comitology is a process in the European Union which is less complicated than the normal regulatory process. So it doesn't go through the whole conundrum that I've just explained with Parliament, Council, and negotiations, trilogues, political families, so on and so forth. It's a much slimmer, shorter, expert-based, commission-driven way of writing norms, let's say, of secondary level importance, those that are meant to only implement a piece of legislation, not actually legislate itself. So the logic of the text is as follows. The list that contains the use cases, the applications of AI that are considered to be high risk, they are put in an annex. If you look at the text, they're Annex 3. The reason why they're in the annex is not because someone thought, it's funny to put them in an annex. It's because then the annex, you can modify it via this simpler procedure that I mentioned earlier, via this comitology. Which means that if in 2 years' time, 2 years' time and a month, I will figure out in the way this technology evolved, that there is a use case that actually is producing a risk that should put it in that category, I can add it. Or on the contrary, if I see in practice, by interacting with companies in the sandboxes that I mentioned earlier, that in fact, a use case that I had included in the high-risk list, in fact, is not high risk, because I noticed that the effects that it produces are not high risk at all, then I can take it out. So again, the whole idea with this is that you would be able to adapt the norm as you go along and as technology evolves. It's not perfect, but again, under the current instruments we have, is the best way to keep it flexible and adaptable to the evolution of AI.
Let's leave a bit the AI act and go back to the debates around AI in general, and more particularly about the public perception of AI. Regularly, when we're talking about the development of AI, that it's economically it's becoming more and more important. We see AI in more and more subjects, more and more processes. There is this sometimes let's say people get frightened and say, "Oh, is AI going to replace me as a worker? Am I going to lose my job because AI robots are going to take over my job?" Is that something that is real in your? Is it something a real risk, or is it something that is more imagined? People should not worry about it.
I always say that as part of the urban legends out there about AI, you have three big culprits. You have Terminator, you have Big Brother, and you have the robot. Terminator, it's that, I would say, understandable, legitimate fear that people have that, oh my God, at some point in time, AI is going to achieve singularity. It's going to achieve that moment of consciousness when it says, I'm actually AI and I have a different interest than the humans that have developed or control me, and therefore I'm going to take over the humans. That's the Terminator. Are we there? We are miles away from that. That's number one. So in terms of the actual capability of all those stories that you might read of, I don't know, algorithms that are becoming self-aware, to the best of my knowledge, that does not exist yet. And I don't think, no matter how quick and how fast and how powerful these algorithms will become, I think there's still a very, very long way to consciousness. And again, that's why we are here, and that's why we write rules, to make sure that, again, that moment doesn't happen. So that takes care of a Terminator. Big Brother. Big Brother is, I would say, probably the most genuine fear, the most genuine reservation and concerns that people have. And again, I've already explained a lot why in the text itself, in the prohibited practices, in the high risk, a lot, in fact, of the rules that we put in place is to ensure that we're not going to have a Big Brother powered by AI, because the temptation is there. The temptation is there. The temptation is to already reached out and used by many dictators around the world. And again, with this legislation, we are trying to prevent that a Big Brother will exist and will be powered by AI. And the third one, equally legitimate in terms of concern, is the robot that is going to replace me in my workplace. Of course, AI as any other technology driving an industrial revolution, AI will be changing many of our jobs. I think it would be naive to say that this will not happen. But just as the steam engine in the first industrial revolution replaced a certain type of labor, but created a myriad of other opportunities as a result of its existence and the result of its changing value chains and production lines and supply lines and everything else, the same thing for AI. Yes, AI is going to replace maybe or change the nature of certain jobs. But number one, it doesn't mean that in absolute terms it's going to be less labor opportunities. What it will require indeed, it will require an adaptation of our labor skills. It will require an adaptation of our education systems from the ground up. That is true. And I would like to see more and more a political conversation or a societal conversation in all of our member states as to what that means. Because I do think that if we are to make sure that this technology is not going to produce the effects that we fear in our labor forces, in our jobs, we need to already have started yesterday preparing for this. And how do we prepare for this? By preparing our kids, by preparing our students, giving them the skills that are necessary to not only develop AI, but also learn to live with it and learn to adapt in their jobs for it. And you can take whatever job you want, from a traffic controller to a lawyer to a doctor to whatever. AI is not going to replace traffic controllers. No, you will still have humans in the tower, in the airport, because the responsibility for landing a plane will still be the responsibility of a human. I'm convinced of that. But what AI will do, it will help that human in actually managing better the sky, rather than doing it as you see now with the little plaques on a board. It will actually automate a lot of what the human traffic controller will need to know before making the decision of which plane lands first. Or if you take a lawyer, there are many who say, oh, lawyers will disappear with AI because AI is going to sift through 1 million tons of jurisprudence within 3 seconds and is going to produce probably a better recommendation than a lawyer as to the line to take or the direction to take in a case. I would say yes and no. Again, yes, AI will be there to help a lawyer to sift through papers for which otherwise that lawyer might have needed hours of work. Absolutely. But it's not going to replace the lawyer, because the lawyer will still be the ones with whom at least I would like to talk to. I wouldn't like to talk to a machine. And I don't think any of you would like to talk to a machine to basically get legal advice. So again, it changes the nature. It changes the fact that we will need to learn how to use this technology to get better into the jobs of tomorrow, but not replace us. And the same goes for lower skilled work, because many say, oh, but lower skilled repetitive work will disappear because we'll have AI-powered robots and lines that will be working by themselves. Yes, that's true. But there will be other type of, let's say, lower skilled repetitive work, like the one you have right now on a production line. You will have all of those armies of workers that will need to feed data into algorithms. You already have, if you look at the data mining farms or at blockchain farms, they are very labor intensive. And it's a kind of very repetitive work that does not require a high level of skill, but it's very labor intensive because it means sitting there and basically doing the same kind of work, feeding the same kind of data into a machine. That will be part of the reality of tomorrow with an AI-powered economy. So I think that for all levels of competence, for all levels of skills, for all levels of interest, AI, again, will change the nature of what we do in our work, will not replace, and will certainly, I'm convinced, will also produce opportunities that we cannot even think of right now. But again, we need to be prepared for that. And that, I think, again, we're not doing enough. I think we need to have an overhaul of our education systems to make sure that we build these competencies in our younger minds, and also that we reconvert the ones that are already, the ones like me, that are already working and who will need at some point in time to acquire new skills to be able to adapt to how reality of our jobs will look like in 5, 7 or 10 years time.
So you just mentioned that collectively are starting to prepare themselves for the changing that AI will bring, but you yourself as a regulator, you have to set the rules for AI, and one key element to be able to make the rules is that you must be able to understand what you are regulating. And I remember on a different topic when there was Frances Haugen. Frances Haugen is the whistleblower from Facebook. She came to the parliament and she mentioned, talking about the algorithm of Facebook, the problem that we have collectively is that in the world there's barely a couple hundred people who understand this algorithm. So in this sense, do you feel that there is enough people who are able to teach you to make you learn how AI work, or is this something that is a black box and that is in the end a bit preventing you from being able to regulate properly AI?
Let's take it on different levels. Number one, are we as regulators equipped to understand AI enough to basically write proper rules? It's certainly not easy, and I can tell you that when I started the mandate more or less 2.5 years ago, 3, there weren't many colleagues of mine, myself included, by the way, who could, let's say, grasp some of these concepts. That is why, in fact, I have advocated and worked hard to create this special committee, because I actually thought that we need to, let's say, educate ourselves. We need to make sure that before we get to the stage where we will actually work on legislation, that we need to increase the level of awareness, the level of understanding of the ins and outs of AI. And in fact, through the work of the special committee, that's what we've done. We've organized hearings, workshops on absolutely every domain that we thought was affected by AI: health, defense, you name it, security, financial markets, everything. And I think that of course, I'm subjective, but I think it was a very good way of doing it. And by the way, many, including US Congress, is actually quite appreciative of us doing that, going through that motion of learning first, getting to a learning curve before we started regulating. And I do feel, also looking now at the conversation that we have with the shadow rapporteurs from the other political groups as part of the negotiations, that it helped, that we are, let's say, better prepared, better equipped to legislate. Now, the other discussion is, in general, are there the skills to actually understand enough and play with these algorithms? Speaking of Frances Haugen and her observation that there are probably 200 engineers in the world right now that can actually understand Facebook's algorithm. And that is an issue. In fact, more generally, the Commission has measured the gap in terms of digital skills from now until 2030, and the actual amount is staggering. It's in the order of millions. So that's why I was saying that we need to rethink our education systems, because we need to find a way to plug that gap. We need to find a way to really reinvest in the way we orient education so that we produce these skills. Speaking to companies, to European companies, they are relatively, for now, they are relatively satisfied with the level of competence that they get from, let's say, the young students coming out of universities in Europe. But there's not enough. And that will be necessary, speaking of regulators. For me, the bigger question is not whether we are equipped right now to write the law. Where will we find in the public domain, in the public authorities, where will we find the experts to then apply the law, to interact with the engineer that will come and explain how the algorithm works? Well, the regulator, in that sandbox that I was mentioning earlier, the regulator will need to have a similar level of expertise to be able to actually interact with the engineer developing the algorithm. And right now, it's not an easy an easy guess that governments, and even at EU level, we will actually be able to pay and retain the kind of talent that we will need to populate the regulators of tomorrow. So these are big challenges in terms of the availability of skills and the capacity to retain these skills that will have to preoccupy our debate in the future.
I'm looking at the time, so I will have the final question before we finish the interview. Beyond the AI Act, what are the areas in which you think work remains to be done to regulate AI, and that is still needs to be done at EU level, international level, or whatever? What is still missing?
Well, there's another piece of legislation that is just about to come, and that is on AI liability. It's an important piece of the puzzle. It's an important complement to the work that we're doing on AI Act, because it's meant to regulate in more detail. We already have some provisions in the AI Act in terms of the sequence of responsibility in the value chain of AI. So, for example, most AI applications are a very complex interaction of bits and pieces of code. So you have one part of a code, but then another company takes it over, feeds it with the data that it is interested, and then it develops another machine, and that machine may evolve into something else, and so on and so forth. How do you allocate responsibility along this evolution, along this value chain? That is a question. And we are trying already in the AI Act to have some sort of a sequence of how such responsibility is being passed on from one stage in the development of an AI product to the next. But this new piece of legislation that I mentioned, this AI liability legislation, will be going into much more details in allocating liability for AI and AI products and AI services. And then there is another, of course, the EU does not have any competence for that, but there is a discussion on AI for defense and security, which is a very important issue because, again, just like AI, as I was saying, is powering everything, AI is also going to power warfare in the future. And there's a very important discussion on how and what kind of an algorithms do we want to have behind the weapons of tomorrow. And also, how do you ensure interoperability of the AI that is being developed for warfare in between allies in an alliance such as NATO, for example. So again, a very important conversation for which some rules will need to be put in place. It's not something that, again, we can do as EU because there's no competence for that, but it's something that I know preoccupies NATO, for example, and it is very likely that we will see this conversation growing and at some point also having rules emerging in terms of how AI in the area of defense will look like.
Well, that's very clear. Thank you very much, Dragos Tudorache, for taking the time to answer a question. Before I let you leave, to summarize, like, if people have to remember one thing about the EU regulation of AI, what should they remember?
There is no bad AI. AI is good. AI is there to help us. That's what we have to understand. We just need to make sure that we set the right rules in place to help us. And I think then we are where we need to be.
Well, that's short and clear. That's perfect. Chat, make sure to thank Mr. Tudorache for his time. You can follow him on Twitter. You see it just below his video feed. Mr. Tudorache, thank you again. I hope you enjoy your I don't know if it's your first time on Twitch. If it is, I hope
it is actually. It is my first time on Twitch, so well, I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Well, enjoy your evening, and hopefully we will see you in the future on the channel. Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye.
All right, guys, let's start the debriefing. Let me just activate my camera. Just need to do the quick switch. In the meantime, let me know what you thought of the interview. There we go. Hi, chat. Thanks. I think Karim left, but thanks, Karim, and to who remains of his audience for the raid. Very much appreciated. So interesting and technical topic that we discussed tonight with Dragos Tudorache. So again, is the one of the two person in charge of AI regulation in the European Parliament. It's currently being negotiated. It's a very complicated, very political piece of legislation. He already mentioned it. He said that in this mandate is the most debated piece of legislation. He said that he had more than 3,000 amendments on the file. I don't know if it's really like the biggest piece of legislation this mandate. It's not the one that got altogether the most amendments. I think like the record goes to GDPR and a couple of the files that got like more than 4,000 or 5,000 amendments. But yeah, still like a 3,000 amendment. It's a good chunk. You're not gonna enjoy yourself reading through it. But yeah, let's. I took my notes. Let's go through them and discuss your impressions and all that. And of course, if you have questions, do send them. I will cover them. So first, we discussed a bit what is an AI, what is artificial intelligence. So he said, yeah, that's one of the big questions that we have to answer. What is an AI? What is not an AI? And in the end, the way he defined it is that an AI is an engine, it's an algorithm. You feed it stuff, so data. You give it stuff, and then at the other end, it's gonna give you a result, another content, another data, and that's what the AI. The AI is the engine, data is the fuel. That's the way he described it. And so the way the EU is dealing with the AI is that instead of regulating the technology in itself, so okay, how does an AI must work or not. Instead, they are regulating uses. They're saying, okay, technology, we leave the technology aside. We're not going to put standards on AI, at least right now. But what we're going to say is we're going to look at how for what is the AI used. And we're going to regulate these uses. We're going to say, okay, there are some uses that we don't want. And so we're going to forbid AI from being used for these purposes. So he mentioned, for instance, biometric recognition. So you put a camera in the street and the camera with an AI will recognize you. It will scan your face and then in the database, an AI will say, okay, this is Quentin and he's doing this. He's a Mepassistant. Please ban him. Or he will recognize you because you didn't sub. Those kind of things. This is biometric recognition and this is banned in the EU. It exists outside. It exists notably in China. But yeah, basically the idea is we don't want certain kind of uses. They are too dangerous. We don't want them in the EU. Then you have others that are, let's say, called high risk AI, where you say, okay, this could go wrong if it's not properly, let's say, regulated. If there is no transparency, if there is no chain of liability, and so you're gonna regulate pretty precisely the whole value chain for these users. Okay, you need to have transparency on what did you feed to this AI, how did it reach the decision, etc., etc. So those are high risk, and then the vast majority of AI, you leave them alone because they don't have uses that would be dangerous to society. Because in the end, the European approach to AI is you could summarize it by the level of regulation depends on the harm you can do to society. You use an AI to create a doodle, like you use what's it called? This AI that create images. It's DALL-E or something like that. DALL-E, yes, DALL-E. This is not dangerous, so it's fine. And even then, you could still find a few things like on deepfakes, etc. But let's assume that DALL-E, it's fine. It doesn't represent a risk for society. On the other end, biometric recognition, very dangerous. We don't want it in the EU. And then you have you will have something in the middle. Let's say you have a school, a university, and you have an AI that is processing the application of students to join, I don't know, a master degree or something, and so this AI is deciding who comes in, who comes out, and so this application, this use would then be considered high risk because it has a potential, high risk on society because it will decide who gets to have an education or not, and so this will have to have like very precise rules, very precise chain of transparency, etc., etc. So the more you have an impact on society, the more you will be regulated, the more you're likely to be limited, or if not forbidden, in the EU. That's what they call the value-centric approach to AI. What else do I have on my thing? Yes, he mentioned an important discussion that we had a few times here on the channel, is the geopolitical aspect to these rules. I mean, when the EU is making rules, it's not only making rules for the sake of making rules, or because there is a need to make rules for this product. It's also a matter of geopolitics when it comes to certain topics, certain sensitive issues. Digital particularly, and AI even more so, because like I mentioned in the introduction, the EU always try to, let's say, be first to regulate digital stuff. The EU loves to regulate digital stuff. Think GDPR, think copyright, think DSN, DMA, etc. The EU wants to be first on the ground, not because it likes to have the gold medal, say, oh yeah, you look, I was first to make the rules. Is that then it set the standard. It sets the standard, and that means that you're the one who opened the way, and so the other countries, when they will decide to regulate it themselves, they will look at the EU and say, oh, so okay, so the EU did that looks to work, so I'm going to copy their rules. Or they said they're going to say, okay, actually, I want to have access to the European market, so I will need to follow their rules, so I will de facto apply European rules even if I'm outside the EU. So that's one part of the geopolitical interest of EU regulation, and then especially applied to AI, because like we mentioned, AI could have a number of uses that would be highly dangerous, and so he said, yeah, it's a geopolitical interest to have the EU setting the rules, because otherwise, if the rules are the global standards is, let's say, the Chinese way of dealing with AI, we're screwed, because you would have biometric recognition everywhere, so that would be a complete mess. So there is, beyond the mere idea of regulating AI, there is a global interest for the EU, and in the end for everyone, to be the first mover, to move first on the topic. We talked about, he mentioned quite a bit when we discussed the relationship between the EU and the US, to try to make sure that they have let's say, a common understanding that they're pushing the same way when it comes to AI. You mentioned something called the TTC. So the TTC, the Technology and Trade Council, if I'm not mistaken. It's basically it's a sort of organization that was created a bit more than a year ago to discuss some very specific topic, technology and trade, between the US and the EU. Why was it created? Because we were just going out of 4 years of Donald Trump. Relationship between the EU and the US were pretty cold, if not bad, to a certain extent. And so to, let's say, restart good cooperation between the EU and US as Donald Trump was on his way out and was leaving. And given, like, again, the geopolitical importance of some topics, and so the importance of the EU and the US pushing in the same direction, especially when looking at what Russia or China were doing, this TTC was created as a forum to say, okay, on this we can work together, and we're going to try to have a common agenda and to make sure that we're pushing in the same way. So that's why this was created, and so it became, let's say, a forum where Americans and Europeans can talk to each other and try to understand each other, and trying to make sure that they are going the same way. And so he mentioned, yeah, the US is not at the stage of regulation for now. They're not regulating AI. They're a step behind us. But because of the consultation work that happened in the past at international and then bilateral level, there is, let's say, a common understanding of AI. There is a common base on which both the EU and the US wants to go through, and so that means that there will be you won't have the US going in a complete different direction than the EU, which of course would be bad for everyone. we mentioned, then I have the list of problematic uses. So we mentioned biometric recognition. We explained already the social scoring. So it's something that exists mostly in China, but not only. I'm sure that if there is AI in North Korea, you will be certain to find social scoring. Is the practice of using AI to rate people, and mention like the sensors, the AI is going to look at everything that you do in your life. You walk in the street, you are in a shop, whatever you do, and it will rate it according to your behavior and assess whether you are a threat to society or problematic for the regime. And so they will give you a score. That's why it's called social scoring. And according to your score, you potentially get access to some things or not. So it's a way to de facto create discrimination and, of course, serve the interest of the state because, like he mentioned at some point, it's Big Brother. Basically, it's this kind of thing. Yes, one of the problems of the AI and that we discussed briefly is the question of bias, and one of the reasons why there is no willingness to have biometric AI and biometric recognition AI, and also why some of the MEPs are not so keen to allow, let's say, the police, for instance, to security forces in general, to use AI for predictive justice or predictive policing, etc., etc., because AI can have bias. AI is not a perfect technology. Well, it's a technology, but it reflects the bias that you feed it. So if the human that makes the AI or that feeds the AI has a bias, the AI will translate this bias. So if you give the AI biased data, so let's say that you give an AI that does predicting policing, so that we look at people and say, okay, is this person likely to do a crime? If you give the AI data that says if the person is black, it's gonna be a murderer, then the AI, when analyzing the people in the street, will reproduce that. It was told if someone is black, he's gonna be a criminal. When he sees a black person, he's gonna say this is a criminal. I'm exaggerating, but that's basically the debate and the issue of bias in AI, especially since AI not only like reflect the bias that you feed it, they accelerate them. They make it go even further because of the sheer scale that an AI can have, especially if it becomes like it can do some self-learning, so it can improve itself and so builds on what already you're giving it. So if you give him a bias, he's going to build on that bias and make it reach higher and higher and higher level. And if you have an AI that is meant to surveil people, to do policing, it's going to be able to process a lot of things at the same time. And so the damage done by one individual bias becomes demultiplied by 10, 100, 1,000, etc., etc. One issue that he discussed is governance, and he mentioned specifically GDPR, in the sense that we don't want to reproduce the problems that we have in GDPR when it comes to governance, because it's very nice and well to invent rules that the EU and MEPs have fun writing new laws about AI or whatever. But then you have to apply these rules, and you have to make sure that then the authorities are enforcing these rules, meaning that they make sure that people respect the rule. So that's governance. And one of the problems that we saw emerging, especially in the field of digital regulation, is governance. Initially, and the GDPR is the typical example. Like, everyone loves GDPR. GDPR protects personal data. That's great, etc., etc. But there is nonetheless a huge problem with GDPR, which is governance. Why? Because you have GDPR, so the rules are the same all over Europe. On paper, the rule in Ireland is the same as in France, as in Poland. Everyone falls under the same rule. But the ones who make sure that the rules are applied are in each member state. So it's national authority. So you will have one authority in France, one authority in Ireland, one authority in Poland, and each one of them will apply the rules as they understand them. The problem is that, of course, that creates problem when, let's say, Ireland does not have the same interpretation as France, or does not have the same means to enforce the rules as France or as Poland, etc., etc. So you create where there was supposed to be like a equality and harmonization all across Europe, like everyone was supposed to be at the same level, because you have national governance and you have differences between the country. Then you recreate differences on the interpretation and the enforcement of the rule, meaning that GDPR is not applied the same way in Poland, in Ireland, in France. First problem. The second problem that is more specific to GDPR is that since you have technology companies that are mostly based in a limited number of countries, you de facto centralized all the enforcement in a limited number of countries. So on GDPR, we all know that Apple, Facebook, Google, they're all in Ireland, meaning that it's Ireland that has the most power when it comes to GDPR enforcement, but they are not so keen to enforce properly things or as ambitiously as a code, and so that creates problems. So the solutions to that is something that has been pushed forward in notably in the DSA, is to do the opposite. Instead of leaving the governance, the enforcement of the rules in the member states, so in France, in Germany, in whatever, you centralize it to an extent in Brussels, in the Commission, where you create, you make sure that one European-wide authority, depending on the Commission, for instance, will make sure that the rules are applied the same altogether. So you don't anymore have the problem of rules being applied differently in Poland, in France, etc. It's done in Brussels, of course, with the help of national authorities, etc., etc. But that's one way to avoid differences in enforcement. And so Mr. Tudorache was saying that that's what he wants to do with the AI Act, meaning that he wants a EU authority to handle the enforcement of the AI Act. What else did we talk about? Because I'm looking at time, I don't want to finish too late because the day was pretty long. A couple of things I want to discuss, yes. Committology. He said when we discussed about how do we change rules, how do we make sure that the list of AI that are forbidden or highly regulated still is relevant in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, so on and so forth. How do we amend things when you're writing the law right now in 2022? And so he said the way we're doing that is through committology. So what is committology? Committology is a very specific and complicated part of EU regulations, so the regulatory work, which is outside legislative work. So it's not something that involves the parliament. It's not something that where you have the MEPs and the council negotiating with the commission, etc., etc. It's groups of experts. After a legislation has been written and decided, you will have groups of experts from the member state, from different sectors, who with the commission will work on very technical issues and try to, let's say, work out the quirks in practice once the regulation is put in place. So to take the concrete example of the AI Act, the AI Act is going to be approved, finalized, going to become officially law. Everyone will be happy, so etc. Then you will have this group of experts that will look at the technical parts of the act. For instance, the kind of AI that are forbidden or that are considered high risk, this kind of thing. They will look at those, and depending on the feedback that they get, the information that they get, they will work and say, okay, actually, this AI use, it's not so dangerous, so I can take it out of the high risk the high risk list. However, these two other uses are quite dangerous. We will add them to it. So it allows to update the rules once they are in place. All that under the control of the commission, but it's not something that is legislative. You don't have the parliament. The parliament is not involved. The council is not really involved, etc. So it's something that is a bit aside. That is, you have to say, criticized as well, because since it's very technical. It's not under the the framework of the parliament or the council. It's quite opaque. It's very complicated. You don't know exactly who is in it, who is not. Are the experts in there quite balanced? Are they biased or not, etc. So it's criticized. This method called committology is actually quite criticized as well for being a bit opaque and potentially leading to I don't know if I can call it abuses, but at least biases that would favor this or that stakeholder. But in any case, that's how you update legislation without reopening it. And then, of course, if the commission say, okay, we need to redo the rules, then of course you can redo the rules, and then you go back to parliament, to council, etc., etc. But for more technical changes, you can go through comitology to do so. And so you have thousands of thousands of these expert groups that participate in this comitology process to make sure that EU law stay up to date on let's say on technical specifications. And to finish, well, no, another thing that I thought was interesting is when we discussed about how do MEPs get to know the topics that they are regulating. So he said, he's a lawyer by trade, Mr. Tudorache, so he's not an engineer, but he's taken a keen interest in AI since the beginning of the mandate. So how does he and his colleagues get the knowledge to, in the end, be able to regulate AI, to write the law? What makes them competent in the end, despite the fact that they're not engineers to begin with? So there is a lot of work being done by MEPs individually. They're meeting lobbyists from left, right, and center to understand understand things. They have their assistants, their teams who are reading a lot of stuff to as well understand the technicalities of things. You have within the committees hearings, workshops, events to, let's say, gather knowledge and also debates that MEPs and their staff and everyone in the bubble can have access to get technical knowledge and also help them build their technical and political opinion on the topic. And in the case of AI, they also decided to create even a specific committee. So you have let's say in the parliament, you have permanent committees, so committees that are always there. The Libe committee, the defense committee, the foreign affairs committee, single market committee. So those committees are permanent; they're always there. And then sometime the parliament decides to create special committees that are temporary on a specific topic to investigate a bit further one topic. And so you add one of those special committees on AI to allow the MEPs that are part of it to get specific knowledge on AI. So it was a lot of hearings. So they were inviting a lot of people working in the field of AI in different sectors, research, education, finance, etc., to help the parliament get knowledge and get a first feel and opinion on AI, and then that opened the way for later then MEPs being able to work on the regulation. So when MEPs work, I mean, in the case of Mr. Tudorache, the AI Act was proposed, I think, 2021. He is now negotiating in 2022. He did not discover the topic of AI in 2021. He's been working actually since 2019 on that. So it takes years for an MEP and his team. Before even they work on the topic, on the regulation, they've been working on that for years to accumulate knowledge and make their own opinion. So it's not, even if they are not experts to start with, they're not engineers, they acquire knowledge and they become experts as things goes. And so the longer they specialize on something, the more and more they become an expert on things. So that's how in the end MEPs become and their teams and all that become very competent and able to regulate what they regulate, is because they have been accumulating knowledge, meeting people all along for years and years and years. And final thing I wanted to discuss, he said, one of the topics that outside the AI Act that is looked at and not at EU level because it's not a competence, is the question of AI in defense technologies and all that. What is the debate there? like he mentioned, there is, for instance, the idea. Of course, you're gonna have AI in military equipment. So you need to make sure that, for instance, in the field of NATO, that a French AI are able to talk to British AI, are able to talk to American AI, so that they are able to work together in the interoperable. So that's one thing, to make sure that AIs from allied countries can work together. The second big debate that is subject of international discussion is whether certain type of AI should be forbidden, including in military technologies, typically autonomous drones or autonomous weapons, meaning that you put an AI in a drone, and the AI is able to decide by itself whether to shoot or not. It doesn't need a human to tell him, okay, you will shoot now on this target. The AI will decide by itself, I will shoot on this target. And so there is a debate. There has been push at a UN level to try to forbid these technologies, so that prevent that any country would have AI that are able to shoot by themselves without needing a human. So far, these push have been blocked by, it's not going to be surprising, countries that are developing themselves autonomous weapons. So the US, Israel, China, France, the UK, etc. Why? Because for them it's a national interest. They consider that they're getting an edge on that, and so they want to keep their edge in this field and give their own defense an advantage on this. But that's one of the big, let's say, international debates related to AI, and that has very concrete consequences, because yes, we're talking about an AI being able to decide by itself whether it's going to kill someone or not. But yeah, that's what I had on my side. I didn't see any comments or additional question. So unless you become very inspired in the next minute, I'm going to start my conclusion. So I hope that you enjoyed the discussion, the topic, and all that, and do give me feedback. As always, if you like what you saw, you can follow me on the channel, of course, but you can also follow me on my other social media. There you go. You have Discord, Twitter, and all the good things. You just have to click and you get access to that. You can toss a coin to your streamer via Coffee. You can subscribe if you like what you saw. That's always appreciated. And beyond that, next time I will see you, it's going to be on Sunday at 7 p.m. We're going to have something chill. I'm going to collect a bunch of let's say good EU promotion, funny EU promotion, and I'm going to watch it and react it with you. I mean, there's a bunch of them. I haven't seen most of them, and so we're going to have some fun looking at what happens when the EU actually gets inspired to advertise itself. And yeah, that's it. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you on Sunday or next week. Bye, guys. Ciao.